Good morning. I'm Bob Durkin, President of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce, welcoming those in the room here at the Scranton Chamber and those who will be joining us on Facebook Live. And we'll be recording this for use by the three cooperative chambers of commerce working on this. We have the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Pittston Chamber of Commerce, and the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber of Commerce. So we welcome all of the members of those three organizations and thank the other regional chambers for their collaboration with us. Today, we have a forum, an informal conversation with the candidates for the 8th Congressional District of Pennsylvania to the U.S. Congress. This morning, the first person up will be Jim Bognet, Republican candidate for the office. And what I want to do is give you a quick introduction to Jim. We have an opportunity for you to offer some comment, and we'll move along with the questions. So Jim Bognet was born and raised in Hazleton. After graduating from Penn State, on a full academic scholarship, Jim earned a law degree and MBA at UCLA. He's been a small business owner, served professionally on a conservative policy, and has served professionally as a conservative policy advisor. In 2017, he was appointed to a senior position in the Trump administration in Washington, working on expanding American manufacturing, creating jobs, and supporting small business. Jim is the son of a teacher and a local construction company owner. He's proud to have one grandfather, an Italian immigrant coal miner, and a grandmother and grandfather who served abroad in the Army and Navy, respectively, in World War II in Europe and the Pacific. So we welcome this morning, Jim Bognet. Good to have you, Jim.
Thank you all for having me this morning. As I was listening to him read that, I just kept looking at the pictures of those two handsome men up there. And let me assure you, it's not as good in real life. I'm really grateful to be here today. I grew up in a small business family. My father owns a construction company in Hazleton, and him and my uncle founded it in 1969. So my first entry into the business world was at 9 years old, cleaning fittings that we sold, pipe fittings. I later graduated to mopping the floor, which was fantastic, and then cleaning the toilets, and then had my own paper route. Had my own grass cutting business. So while they were all small businesses, maybe not quite as large as the ones that you all work for and run, I grew up learning the value of hard work, that the only thing that gets you ahead in this world is to work hard, work smart, and to get up every day and go out there and fight for your family, fight for your community. The business community has taken so many hits the last 3 years. I know we have folks of all political persuasions in this room, but I will never forgive the authorities for the way they handled COVID. The business community was whipsawed over the last 3 years with arbitrary regulation, with a guy in Harrisburg that was making decisions about whether you could or could not go to work every day, with non-scientific based approaches to COVID. I can assure you, as someone from the construction business, we were one of only 2 states to shut down construction in the whole country. And it was an outrage, and we've never been apologized to. Nobody's ever said I was wrong. We overdid it. We used fear as a weapon to stop businesses from operating. I'll never forgive them for that. This year, we have started moving forward again, which I'm very happy for. But guess what? We're in a recession. I don't know if you all have felt it in your businesses, but in the construction business, in the last 3 to 6 months, you can feel the jobs drying up. I've been all over the state talking to people as I've campaigned. It's pretty clear to me that we're entering a recession if we're not already in one. The stock market's down 25%. Interest rates have doubled. We have not seen inflation like this since I was a child, a small child, 2, 3, 4 years old. We are about to enter a period of some pain. And so it's more important than ever that we have people in Washington who understand what the cause of the problems were and know how to solve them. There were certainly some supply chain issues lingering from COVID. That's a fact. But our fiscal and monetary policy has been an absolute disaster. We pumped $6 trillion of unfunded money that we borrowed from, a lot of it from China, a lot of it from citizens of our own country, into the economy in about 12 months. And we wonder why there's inflation. We left interest rates, real interest rates were negative for the past 10 years. And we wonder why there's inflation in the economy. The current administration attacked American energy production, attacked natural gas, stopped pipelines, pulled federal leases, and we wonder why gas prices have doubled. We need to turn this country around. I think our economy's in a ditch. I look forward to answering all your questions, and I really appreciate you coming out to hear me out this morning.
Great, thanks, Jim. So some of this, I'm sure you've already, for this first question, you did some of it, but maybe we get into some more specifics. So in the 118th Congress, if you're elected to the 8th Congressional District, what are going to be your top priorities?
Well, I think the number one thing that is going to happen in the next Congress is we are going to see a different majority and a different speaker. Nancy Pelosi will no longer be running the country. You will have divided government again. And this country's done pretty well under periods of divided government in Washington. So what are we going to try to do and go in there? The first thing we do on the first day of the new Congress is going to be to offer a bill to repeal the 87,000 new IRS agents that President Biden and my opponent, Mr. Cartwright, so ruthlessly championed. As a small business owner myself and growing up in small business, it is very hard to deal with the IRS. The customer service is horrible. They come in and audit you. Many small business owners, if you're a contractor with 4 guys in a van, you don't really fight with the IRS. Whatever they tell you, you have to pay, you pay. That's a backdoor tax increase. So on day one, we are going to push to get rid of the 87,000 new IRS agents and the tax increases that came from the really misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. Have any of you seen your inflation rates go down in the last 3 months since that act was passed? I know we haven't. So that'll be the first thing we do. Number 2, try to get our infrastructure working again. We had an infrastructure bill last year. There seems to have been some, profound delays in getting that money out to where it can really help us. I know Route 80, 81, 84, the interstate highway system in Northeast Pennsylvania, I'm on it every day. It needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of work. One thing I'm not for is putting bridges and tolls on our interstates. My opponent has been in favor of that. I think that would be the worst thing we can do. I'm sure you're all aware gas prices in Northeast Pennsylvania are some of the highest in the whole state. They're 40 to 50 cents higher than across the river in New Jersey. We need to cut our gas tax here, bring that down to have a more competitive gas rate. Also, energy development. We hit upon it in the first answer, but we need more energy. Pennsylvania energy could power the whole East Coast of America. We could be the Texas of the East Coast. But we have an administration in Washington and we have a current congressman that are not in favor of that. They believe that fossil fuels are wicked, that they're a horrible thing for the planet. Let me tell you something. We are going to be running off of fossil fuels here in Northeast Pennsylvania for the foreseeable future. I'm all in favor of renewable energy. I'm all in favor of nuclear energy. But for right now, we have an economy that runs on carbon energy. And we all know that in this room. We all drive cars. These people live in a fantasy world of the Green New Deal. I call it the Green Raw Deal. It's a raw deal for consumers. So one of my priorities in Washington is to open up the energy resources we have here in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. So as a Chamber of Commerce or collective chambers of commerce, economic development is at sort of our heart and soul. But economic development can mean different things in different ways or different levels from a policy standpoint. So when I'm going to ask you this, think about the question or an issue related to economic development in northeastern Pennsylvania at more of a macro level. Thinking of it, what are the big picture policy issues that will be affecting the United States and northeastern Pennsylvania? How would you as a congressman address economic development in northeastern Pennsylvania?
Well, one of the things I think we need to do is really be clear-eyed about where we are, but really have an aspirational goal of where we're going. Right now, we have a lot of competitive advantages in certain areas. Number one of those is warehouse logistics. If you go down Route 81 and Route 80, they are putting in warehouses left and right. That's great in the sense that we're adding jobs, and I'm in favor of that. But some of the communities are having profound challenges dealing with the externalities that brings. We need more housing. We need way more housing in Northeast Pennsylvania. We need more housing that people can afford to live in. So that's a big challenge that I want to work on. I would like to see us move farther up the value chain. Now out in Monroe County, we have some good pharmaceutical industries moving in here. Luzerne and Lackawanna County have seen some knowledge workers come in from New York and Philadelphia and move up here. I love that. But one of the things I talk about in my campaign is so many of the guys that I played football and gals that I played football with or that I went to high school with, they leave Northeast Pennsylvania and they never come back. And it's very sad when you talk to, a woman in her 70s who says, I never see my grandchildren because my son or my daughter had to move to Texas to get a job. I think we need more of those jobs for college educated people so we can move up the value chain. We also need better VOTEC education and more VOTEC education. My mother was a public school teacher for 32 years in Hazleton. She spent the last 20 at the VOTEC school, the Hazelton area VOTEC. She trained people to be accounts receivable and accounts payable clerks. She trained people to do all sorts of accounting, stenography, executive assistant work. There is a lot of good work at the VOTEC level that we can have for people, but I just don't think we put enough resources and enough prioritization in that. So that's one place. Workforce is a huge issue. The number one thing I've heard the last 3 years from companies is they can't find people, and the people they can find have some challenges, frankly, in being employed. I was with a gentleman who owned a bakery yesterday. He had 20 employees, and he talked with some passion about how hard it is to folks in his workforce to support them. Some of them are dealing with addiction issues. Some of them were recently incarcerated. The people he can get oftentimes only stay for 2 to 4 months before they move on to another job. It is a very real problem for our small businesses to recruit talented people and to retain them. On the other hand, I also worry that as we tip into a recession, these 8 million job openings that we keep hearing about, well, we lost 1 million of them in August. And I'm worried we could lose another 1 million of them in September. So things can change very quickly in the economy. We've had a dearth of used cars and new cars. And now my friends that are in the car business tell me we're going to have a glut of new car inventory in the next 6 months. So the economy is rapidly changing. A recession will be a shock to the system. We haven't had a recession since 2008. That's 14 years. That's kind of amazing. I worry that the flood of cheap money, $31 trillion of debt, that the next recession will be a very painful one. So that's, I think, going to be really the number one focus next year as we deal with economic issues.
Let me just touch on one of the elements that you mentioned earlier, supply chain issues. As a congressman, what are your thoughts on what Washington might be able to do to assist in that regard?
When I went to get my MBA at UCLA in the early 2000s, the thing that was in vogue was just in time inventory and Six Sigma. I never really figured out Six Sigma, but I understood just in time. And just in time was the concept that you could source your supply chain anywhere in the world. We have no borders anymore. And it's going to be great, time of international kumbaya, everybody gets along. And it doesn't matter where you buy your products from, just buy them wherever they're the cheapest. We really saw the downside of that during COVID. When we have a world that's becoming more violent, when we have a land war in Europe at a major scale for the first time since 1945, when we have what used to be a strategic competitor, China, that I believe is morphing into an adversary, so having your supply chain in China, to me, is a very dangerous thing right now. Now, of course, they pay their workers nothing, so they have really cheap products. They steal our intellectual property. So, of course, they don't have to spend a lot on research and development if you just steal it from your neighbors. I think that we are going to see over the next 10 years a lot of onshoring of our supply chain back to the United States of America. And I think we have to think really deeply about our key strategic industries, pharmaceutical, technological, about bringing the supply chains back to America, or at least back to North America, so they are secure. I think that is going to be one of the things that gets talked about a lot in the next Congress. We don't have all the answers how federal government should facilitate that process, but I've heard from people on both sides of the aisle that we can't be in a situation anymore where all our PPE, many of our drugs, most of our semiconductors are sourced out of China. The Biden administration, which I agree with on very, very little, I will say they have taken some dramatic steps to limit semiconductors going to China. I think that's just the first you're going to see over the next 5 years of many steps like that.
Thanks. You touched on it briefly again. You touched on a lot in your first comments. You're messing up my question.
I'm sorry.
80% of Chamber of Commerce members across our multiple chambers are small businesses. 25 or fewer employees. In many cases, 70% have 10 or fewer employees. What kind of policies would you support out of Washington to support our small business community?
One thing that I know coming from the small business community, there's not much overhead available to deal with regulatory issues. Bigger companies have a chief counsel, have a regulatory affairs officer, have a government affairs officer. Small businesses don't have that don't have that kind of margin to be able to go out and do that. I would like to see a much more streamlined approach to regulation. Governor DeSantis in Florida has been pushing every time you pass a new regulation, you need to get rid of 5 old ones. I think the federal regulatory structure is out of control. Our founders never imagined an administrative state like we have in Washington. Working for President Trump in Washington was very revelatory. There are a group of people in Washington, D.C. that are totally unaccountable to elected officials. I was an appointee of the President of the United States. I had a gentleman who was working for me as a webmaster. His job was to put up press releases and put up marketing materials on our website. One Sunday, I was working late. I was sending him stuff. He didn't answer me. The next morning I came in and I said, how come you didn't put the materials on the website yesterday? Oh, Jim, I'm civil service. I don't work on Sundays. Looked up what he made $145,000 a year, but was unwilling to work on a Sunday. We have tens of thousands of people that are costing us as taxpayers $100,000 a year or more in Washington that don't report to us, don't respond to incentives like we have to. We need to trim down the regulatory state in Washington, D.C. If we trim down the regulatory state in Washington, D.C., that will make it easier for small business owners. Also, tax policy. The 2017 tax proposals that went through really were very favorable to small businesses, from qualified business deductions to bring down the rates. For C Corps, we saw the rate go from 35 to 21. Joe Manchin and Matt Cartwright and others that are of a more liberal persuasion in Washington wanted to raise it to 26% this year. Tax increases are not the answer when you are going into a recession. I will not vote for tax increases going into a recession. And again, who do they hurt more than anybody? Small businesses. Small businesses don't have the accounting folks, don't have the tax attorneys that you pay $600 an hour to figure out ways to minimize their taxes. Again, when the IRS comes after them, they pay their taxes like good Americans. I think we need to keep taxes low. And I think the worst thing we could do is have 87,000 new IRS agents out auditing our small businesses. The big businesses we already go after. The big businesses are very, we have IRS agents all over the country that are going after them. These new IRS agents are to go after me and you, mark my words. And I would like you to ask the next guy what his justification is for unleashing 87,000 new IRS agents on our businesses.
So sticking with the small business issue, one of the things that we're certainly pleased with here at Scranton Chamber and with our other local chambers, frankly, throughout the 8th Congressional District, is we do have a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem. There are entrepreneurial programs that are housed in each of the different communities, counties, and universities and colleges and educational institutions. That said, it's a growth area for us now. It's an opportunity when we're talking about small business to be able to do what we can, do everything we can to help these businesses and individuals to grow those entrepreneurial dreams. Thoughts on what you might be able to do in Congress to be able to support entrepreneurship?
Well, number one, it would be great to see a reformed small business administration. The Small Business Administration, I think the last time it had an authorization was over 20 years ago. I would like to see a much more effective, much more customer-focused small business administration. Number two, colleges and universities. So much of the entrepreneurial vigor out in Silicon Valley and in Boston comes from having some major research institutions there. I would like to be an advocate for our colleges. We have some great colleges here: Scranton, Wilkes, King, Penn State, East Stroudsburg. I would like to see more research dollars going into our local colleges and universities. That attracts engineering talent from around the country. Those people spin off and start their own small businesses. I think that would be another thing that would really help entrepreneurship. But just on a macro basis, one of my big things is to get the government out of the way. We want the government to help, but man, there's a very, very fine balance between the government doing too much and trying to pick winners and losers and the government trying to help everybody. So I think that's important to remember. But when Sean McCormick wants to add employees, we need to have congressmen that are there to help. When John Stack wants to expand his business, we need congressmen ready to help. And one thing that I've heard over and over again as I've gone around the district is in the last 10 years, we haven't had a congressman that goes out and sits through the business development thing. Kalahari Resort, which many of you are familiar with, when we were going after that and trying to get that to Northeast Pennsylvania, the Monroe County folks asked our congressman to come out there and be part of the team that met the gentleman who was going to build that at the airport. He sent a staff member when they were having some of their all-day meetings working through permitting issues. Nobody from the congressman's office was there. If we want to be competitive as Northeast Pennsylvania, we need congressmen that are very focused on that. And I've had extensive conversations with Dan Muser about this, with Dan Muser and I, both in Congress and a Republican majority. It's very likely that Dan will have a prominent position on the Small Business Committee. I think there's a lot of things we can do to fight for Northeast Pennsylvania to make sure we get our share of federal dollars, but also to make sure we put up a united front working intergovernment from local, state, and national federal government working to bring business here, bring more things like Kalahari, which employs, almost 1,000 people. That's the kind of effort we need to win business. My first job out of business school was working in economic development for a governor. I know what we can do if we put our mind to it. If we have some leadership, we can bring better and more jobs here to Northeast Pennsylvania.
So COVID really exposed what was already a problem in northeastern Pennsylvania and across the country, and that's workforce. We had always talked about the disconnect between job opportunities and the education elements they're supporting those job opportunities. What policies or legislation specifically would you look to bring in the area of workforce development?
I'll try not to talk solely about COVID when it pertains to workforce, but I think COVID was a case study that we'll be studying in, the business schools across the country on how to screw up your workforce. Arbitrary rules, firing people based on their medical decisions, mandatory masking, even where it wasn't necessary. We've really screwed up, let's just be frank, a whole generation of young workers that are entering the workforce because they didn't have mentorship, because we encouraged people not to come to work for a year and a half. It was disastrous. Nobody's apologized. Everybody seems real happy with the way they used fear to destroy businesses, fear to put restaurants out of business, fear to go after small businesses over large businesses. Walmarts were allowed to be open and small mom and pop retail shops were not allowed to be open. It was disastrous. It was unconstitutional in my view. The federal government really destroyed businesses, and it made it tough on workforces. How do we dig out of this hole? Number one, we got to get people back to work. Obviously, businesses make their own decisions, but we have to have a regulatory structure that doesn't favor remote work. And you know who needs to get back to work? The people that we pay, the state, local, and federal government. There are still federal government guys in DC that haven't been in the office for 2 years. That's embarrassing. That's a failure. That's a waste of trillions of dollars of money. We need people back at their desk working that we pay taxpayer dollars. What else can we do for workforce? Obviously, VOTEC, as we've talked about. I think that would help tremendously. I think we also have to make it easier and more streamlined for people to hire workers. I've seen the checklist that Bognet Incorporated, our construction business. The amount of forms and paperwork when we hire somebody is out of control. I think we also have to realize that in a post-COVID world, people want more flexible working arrangements, both on hours and on locations. We got to think through how, as businesses, we deal with that. But the federal government hasn't really changed. Think about it. The world's changed in the last 2.5 years. Our federal regulatory structure for hiring employees hasn't changed. And I think that's put us really behind the 8 ball. But the other thing I think we really need is we need to make Northeast Pennsylvania a place where workers want to come back to. And we're seeing that a little bit. Monroe County, parts of Lackawanna and Luzerne County, we are seeing people move in from out of the area. They like our quality of life. They like the community spirit we have here. They like the lower cost of living to our competitor states. I really think that we will have some real advantages in workforce in the white collar area as we go forward. But I think in the blue collar area, the number one thing is housing. The housing stock is really in bad shape. If you drive around Hazleton, downtown Wilkes-Barre, parts of Scranton, our housing stock really needs some improvement. We need to make it easier to build in Northeast Pennsylvania. I talk to developers often. They say it's very hard to get approvals. There's a lot of NIMBYism. There's also a lot of state government regulation. We need to make it easier to build housing because people don't want to move here if they can't get a good house to raise their family. And the home is the center of the family. That's where you teach your kids. That's where you sleep every night. If we don't have good housing for people, how do we convince them to come to Northeast Pennsylvania?
So sticking with the workforce issue and some of the things that have been exposed through the COVID experience, childcare. We have issues across the board, and we have largely because it affects women at a higher level than men by choice, not requirement. It's keeping many women from coming back into the workforce or growing at a pace where they were moving along the scale. Thoughts on what the federal government or what a congressman might be able to do on the child care issue?
Well, a lot of that is at the state level, but at the federal level, I do think we can experiment with things to try to make it easier for people to do childcare. I know, for example, Geisinger, which is a big employer, allows flexible telework. Some of their pharmacists wake up 5:30 to 7. They work remotely. They then have an hour, 7 to 8 or 7:30 to 8:30 to get their kids on the school bus. Then they go into the office, work from the office, do the same thing in the afternoon, go home, let their kids off the bus, get them settled, maybe make them something to eat, and then work for another hour remotely. Those are the kind of flexible work arrangements that I think COVID has, one of the small silver linings has opened the door to, that you can still have productivity with a more flexible. I would like to encourage that as a congressman. I think that would be very helpful. I would love to get feedback from the folks in the room after this session is over, what you think we can do to encourage workforce. One other thing I will say is we have to have sensible science-based policies. None of us in this room are wearing masks, but some state buildings, people are mandated to wear a mask. People don't want to go to work wearing a mask all day, especially 2.5 years after a pandemic started where over 70% of the population is vaccinated. So we need to have science-based policies, not fear-based policies. That would make it easier to get people back in the office. That would make it easier to bring people back in the workforce. We also have to think to the future. I mean, so many people, my mother included, retired during COVID. They were so scared out of their mind by our public officials that they retired. There's a whole portion of people in their 50s and 60s that left the workforce early and haven't come back yet. I think we got to think creatively about how we incentivize those people who have decades of experience to come back into the workforce, and that could really help us plug the gaps.
Well, I think this will dovetail right into the last part of your answer there. So the business community needs a wider and deeper pool of talent and workers. So how do you see immigration in this light? And how should Congress address immigration issues?
So my grandfather, who had the same name as me, he was born Vincenzo Bugiccio in Italy, came through Ellis Island in 1911, was a coal miner here. I have deep admiration for legal immigration. Many of us in this room, I would wager to say 80–90% of the people in this room have a grandfather, great-grandfather, grandmother who came from another country. Northeast Pennsylvania was built on legal immigration. And I'm proud of that. Every time you go to a Polish festival or an Irish festival or an Italian festival, you just see what a contribution to our life legal immigrants have made. So I'm all in favor of legal immigration. And frankly, I'm against some of the voices in my own party that are against legal immigration. I am steadfastly for legal immigration. I'm not for illegal immigration. I won't try to explain it away. I won't make excuses for it. It's just wrong and it should stop. And it's our federal government's job to stop it. And when you see a liberal mayor like Eric Adams in New York City say, we need to declare a state of emergency because we're not set up to handle all these illegal immigrants coming here, you know just how profound the crisis is. I'll just speak from my personal experience. And when I graduated Hazleton Area High School in 1993, we had less than 1% of our students required English as a second language teaching. Now over 50% of our students require English as a second language teaching. It's very disruptive to the educational environment for our students. It puts them at a disadvantage. So in the context of immigration, we need to encourage learning English. It is, without question, it's the ticket to a middle-class lifestyle, being able to speak English receive education in English and conduct business in English. We have a vibrant Latino community in Hazleton. I know many of them very well. I play basketball with a bunch of them. We've had some deep discussions about this. It's a very sensitive topic, obviously, because people have family members that aren't here legally. It's not that we don't love those people. It's not that we don't have profound compassion for what they deal with. But if the first thing you do when you come to a country is break the law, that's not a good example. That's not a good metric that you're going to be a law-abiding citizen. So I think we need to encourage legal immigration. We need to make it easier to assimilate and learn English. But we have to be very tough on illegal immigration. I've ran a lot of my campaign on being tough on illegal immigration because it doesn't just hurt the person who broke the law to come here. It has profound effects on society. When you can't get into an emergency room because illegal immigrants are receiving their hospital or receiving their preventative care at an emergency room, that's bad. When our students who were born here are held back because half the people in the room don't understand the language they're being taught in, that has profound effects on a society. So I think we can be compassionate while also saying, this must stop. We cannot have an open border. We cannot be sending stimulus checks. The gentleman that's going to come in and speak after me voted to send $1,200 stimulus checks to illegal immigrants. I think that's shameful. I think that's horrifying when we have $31 trillion of debt. And yet we make excuses for it and say, we had to give them money. We don't have to give them money. We don't have to conform our society to a whole class of people that their first act coming here is breaking the law.
So shifting gears to inflation, which is impacting every part of our personal and professional lives right now. Given that this is clearly a global issue, greatly impacted by the pandemic-related supply chain disruptions and Russian incursion in Ukraine, what can the United States Congress do to address the problem?
Well, the first thing we could do is repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, this is the height of cynicism. 3 months ago, Mr. Cartwright and Nancy Pelosi put through a package that spent $750 billion. And they told you it was an Inflation Reduction Act. That was a lie. That was cynical. It did nothing to reduce inflation. So we could repeal that act and stop spending $300 billion of taxpayer money on climate change technologies. Why can these climate change technologies not operate in the private sector? Because they don't pencil out. Remember Solyndra in 2009, $3 billion down the drain on that. We should not have the government in DC picking winners and losers among new technology. That just doesn't work. Support for basic research, that makes sense. But picking commercial winners or losers, 300 billion while we're having inflation, that doesn't make sense. What can we do? Well, Milton Friedman said that inflation is a monetary thing. So Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, kept interest rates at 0 for 3 years after COVID. And we wonder why there's inflation. Now he's raised them very quickly, and we're going to put ourselves into a recession. I think the number one thing I can do as a congressman is vote for balanced budgets, is not vote for deficit spending. They did 3 off-balance sheet things last year where they did emergency stimulus. The stock market was at record highs. Unemployment was in the 4% range. And Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden thought it was a good idea to spend $6 trillion when we were already $25 trillion in debt. And then they say, well, inflation's not our fault. It is their fault. They made policy mistakes left and right. It only took 18 months, and they put us back into the horrible inflation that we haven't had since the 70s. It's pretty simple. Cut spending, repeal some of the, rescind. We can actually do rescissions, rescind some of these spending programs, and try to get the federal government back to a reasonable amount of spending, not the steroid spending of the last 3 years.
So you touched on this a bit earlier, but energy is important both nationally, in the district and of course Pennsylvania. So with energy as such a key element of our local U.S. and world economies, how do you think the U.S. should address energy policy?
Well, not the way we're doing it now. That's for sure. We put a thing up on Twitter and Facebook yesterday, a cartoon somebody drew of President Biden on his knees in front of a Saudi Arabian sheikh, begging them for oil. It was embarrassing, but even worse, it was ineffective because instead they cut oil production. Right now, we're begging countries like Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, people that are not our friends. We are begging them for oil instead of producing our own oil here in Pennsylvania. The Marcellus Shale The Utica Shale could be producing huge amounts of natural gas. Natural gas is so much more cleaner burning than many other fuels, but people on the other side of the aisle don't like it. Number two, we can be going out there and trying to encourage nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is clean, it's effective. If you really believe in climate change, nuclear energy doesn't in any way contribute to the climate crisis, but people constantly vote against nuclear energy. But I really feel like energy's a jobs program here in Pennsylvania. If we would let pipelines be built, we could be sending our oil and natural gas to New York, New Jersey, Boston, all up and down the eastern seaboard. We really could be the Texas. And you say, where are we going to, get jobs for people? Can you imagine the amount of folks coming out of our high schools and both tech schools that could work in the energy industry if we just unleash it? And this is one place I have to get a little political. The other party that's controlled Congress right now has been totally against exploiting our energy resources. They say the Green New Deal. I say drill, baby, drill. We need more drilling in this country. We need more pipelines in this country. President Biden's decision to shut down the Keystone XL pipeline halfway through was a wrong decision. The decision to pull all the new federal leases for oil and gas, that was a bad decision. That's how we went from $2 gasoline to $4 gasoline. Those are bad decisions made when we put an environmental lobby's concerns over the concerns of ordinary working Americans. We need Pennsylvania energy. It could power this country.
In the upcoming Congress, would you support international economic and trade alliances like the Trans-Pacific Partnership to establish or reestablish global markets?
I do not support the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I am in favor of working with our allies, other democracies, to come up with multilateral trade arrangements. I worked in President Trump's administration to help us work with and deal with our allies. I think we have to be very clear-eyed. We're entering a new period in foreign policy. We have Russia invading Ukraine. We have China making threatening noises on Taiwan. I think we have to be very careful to keep a clear eye on who is our enemy, who is our adversary, who is our competitor, and not confuse one for the other. I think that hasn't been done enough in the last 30 years, frankly, under both Democrat and Republican administrations. And I think you're going to see a new approach to trade under a Republican Congress starting in January.
And so last among our identified questions, we ask that you address the broad political issues of civil discourse and your ability and willingness to work across political aisle to serve the best interest of the business community and our nation.
Well, it certainly hasn't been happening the last few years. The other side took over the House in 2018. None of the major bills this year were passed with bipartisan support. The $2 trillion stimulus package, not any Republican votes. The Inflation Reduction Act, not any Republican votes. If you continue to ram down things in Congress without working across the aisle, you're going to get bad legislation. So I am willing and able to work across the aisle. In my previous stints in government, I've had to work across the aisle. So I think it is a good thing. On the other hand, if we take over the majority, Republicans, by definition, will be working across the aisle because we will still have a Democrat president and we will have a Republican Congress. So you need to have the ability to work with the administration to try to get your priorities through. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to try to spin you into thinking it's going to be easy. It's not. There's a lot of wounds from what's happened over the last 4 years, and we need to try to heal those wounds. It's an interesting time to talk about it since we're 26 days away from an election, and that's when you really see the most clear delineation between the two parties. But we do need people that are willing to work across the aisle. My goal when I become congressman is to work with people of all political persuasions in Northeast Pennsylvania. So for the folks sitting in this room that don't share my political views, I hope you'll call me. I hope you'll work with my office. I hope you'll come in and meet with us. We're not congressmen for one political party. We're congressmen representing our district. So I hope you will come in and talk to me and tell us how we can work productively and creatively with you to try to get some of our priorities for Northeast Pennsylvania passed. And I mean that sincerely. It is going to be something that needs work on both sides of the aisle the next 2 years, because nothing that's purely a Republican idea or purely a Democrat idea is going to pass for the next 2 years. We are going to have divided government, and we're going to have to get used to that. We haven't had a lot of it in the past few years. The other thing I'd say is we need to do a better job at the federal level of working with the state government. I hear constantly from citizens about I need help with this, I need help with that, and they're primarily state issues, but they have a federal component, or they're primary federal issues and they have a state component. I'll give credit to Aaron Coffer and Senator John Udicek working on the Cerro plan. They spent years working on that to try to get that to Nanacoke. They're working hard on that. The guy who's going to follow me is going to come in and take credit for that. Those are the two people who worked the hardest that brought that plant here. We're going to need to keep working on that in a bipartisan manner to get that plant built, if it ever gets built. So many things when it comes to infrastructure must be done in a bipartisan manner. Getting funds for our roads has to be done in a bipartisan way. We have to get President Biden to sign that. Hopefully the fact that he has a highway named after him here, we can get his attention and get his help in making Northeast Pennsylvania better.
So going off script at this point, you again mentioned infrastructure and the infrastructure, the federal infrastructure and jobs bill. One of the challenges that seems to be taking place is that those dollars are not rolling out as effectively as they could be. Any thoughts on what you might be able to do as a congressman to sort of move that along for northeastern Pennsylvania?
Well, there's 435 congressmen in office right now. Number one, an important thing to do is to be in the majority. So I can guarantee you Republicans are going to be in the majority next year. So having a congressman that's in the majority will help. But number two, you're competing with all those other congressmen for attention for your district. So you have to be an advocate. You can't just let things happen. You can't just assume that staff's going to take care of it. The best congressmen I've seen are the ones who pick up the phone and call the federal bureaucrats and bang on them and say, where are our road money? How come this isn't out yet? Who haul them in front of an oversight committee and ask them questions. This bill was passed in April of 2021. How come we're sitting here in October of 2022 and this money isn't out where it could be doing good? So that's one area where I really think that almost this goes beyond ideology. The personal characteristics of the congressman make a great deal. As you could probably tell today, I'm not a shrinking violet. I'm not afraid to throw punches when punches need to be thrown rhetorically. We need a congressman that's going to bang on these federal and state agencies and demand that Northeast Pennsylvania be taken care of. I mean, one of the questions I always ask people is, why does gas cost more in Northeast Pennsylvania than it does in Harrisburg and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh? Nobody's ever given me a good answer to that. I've asked people all over the state. I've asked economists. I never get a good answer. Why are our citizens who have the longest commute in the state, our congressional district has the longest commute, the average worker, how come we're paying more for gas than people in Philadelphia? You would think Philadelphia would have more expensive gas. It's a big city, urban. We have the most expensive gas in the state most of the time. Congressman Cartwright's never answered that question for me in his 10 years in office. Some of the other bureaucrats I've asked in Harrisburg can never answer that question for me. I want oversight hearings. I want to know the answer to that. Why do our citizens pay more for gas than every other citizen in the state of Pennsylvania?
Thanks. So here in the room, we have quite a diverse group of individuals representing different business sectors. We have education, construction, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, and the like. So I'm going to throw it open here, see if we have any questions. Again, because of the way the room is set up, if you ask a question, I'll have to repeat the question for the sake of those who might be watching us on the streaming service. So questions, comments?
I have one question. So I'm a business owner, family man. I was born in Northeast Pennsylvania. My biggest challenge is, you touched on it, is employees, staffing, both white and blue collar. I can't find them. I can put advertisements out, I can put bonus incentives, I just can't find them. I've tried Pennsylvania Career Link, I've tried Indeed, I've tried every resource you can Facebook, you name it. What can we do? What can you do to help small businesses like mine? I have 25, 30 people, I can add 10 people tomorrow, but I can't find them. And when I do have a candidate, I've been told by various amount of people, well, I'm just collecting unemployment. I just need to fill out this application so I can continue to collect them. I mean, they tell me right out. I've called the unemployment office. I've asked them that question in the state of Pennsylvania. How can that be? And I got this from some papers, it's my Bible. Well, you should feel sorry for that person if they're not able to work. They go, they are able to work, but they're just declining my opportunity. So what can you do to help get people, because there are people that just left the workforce that I don't know where they went. What can we do to get people back in the workforce or incentivize them in some way, shape, or form to get them out there so we can start hiring?
Sean, that's
If I can, Sean, I can never repeat that question.
So what can we do? What can you do to help incentivize people to get back to work for small businesses in northeastern Pennsylvania?
for those on online, the question is, what can we do as congressmen to incentivize people to get back to work in Northeast Pennsylvania? And it's a great question, Sean. You know, when I worked in corporate America, there was a lot of talk about corporate culture, how important corporate culture was. We need to work on America's culture. I believe we've had too much of a culture of, well, the federal government could just take care of it. We could just, you know, hey, let's just extend unemployment insurance for another year. Let's just throw stimulus money out there. Let's just get money in people's pockets without the, well, how do we incentivize them to work and learn skills? So I was at a NFIB event yesterday, and the guy who owned the bakery said to me, you know who my #1 competitor is? The Pennsylvania state government. I'm in food service. If I offer my people $12 an hour, the state government food service just offers them $13 an hour. If I offer them $15 an hour, the prison food service offers them $16 an hour. I'm competing with the Pennsylvania state government for low-skilled employees. That had a big effect on me. He said, and if I'm not competing with the Pennsylvania state government, I'm competing with the federal government that says you can go on unemployment for the next 13 months and we'll take care of you. We have to get back in our society to having a culture of work. You know, I always go back to my grandfather. Graduated from 8th grade, went to work in the coal mines at age 14, worked till age 67, retired, came out of retirement and worked till age 81. Where is the culture that says to our people, young and old, that the way to dignity, the way to family stability, the way to success in America is through hard work? When I was growing up, I was told that all the time. I don't hear that in our schools. I don't hear that, frankly, from our companies. I don't hear that from our political leaders. I hear instead how everybody who says they have a problem, says they have anxiety about working, says they can't work, says their boss is too mean. I hear that we speak a lot more about that as a culture. We need to get our culture straight, that hard work is what this country was built on, and to get back to that. And we need to stop as business leaders and political leaders being shy about saying that because we're worried we're going to get canceled or we're worried we're going to get attacked. We have to get back to it. We have to have the courage to do that, or else we're in big trouble. On specific government programs, I do think we can be better with our unemployment insurance system. It could have more oversight. As a congressman, we can certainly do oversight on that. I think you also have to demand from your state leaders, Republican and Democrat, across the aisle. What the heck happened the last 2 years? How come there was so much fraud in the unemployment insurance program? How come we didn't have better checks? Better fiduciary responsibility to take care of that. Because again, Sean, that's stopping you from getting workers. If fraud just sails through, stops you from getting workers. I always talk about that with illegal immigration. The employer that does not want to hire people that are here illegal, if the government just allows other employers to hire people that are here illegally and pay them half as much as a regular worker, that degrades the whole industry because that guy has a competitive advantage. We have to have a regulatory system that ruthlessly goes after people that are breaking the rules with unemployment insurance and that ruthlessly goes after businesses that are breaking the rules. We need to have a return to a rules-based society where people actually do what's expected of them. It's not a perfect answer, but I think it's a start to change the culture.
Dr. Waffa?
I have any questions actually. Through a personal experience with my mother, who's Canadian, my dad passed away, so I brought her here. It was a hell of an experience trying to make her legal, and she is. But the healthcare is unbelievable when it comes to providing basic support. What are your thoughts on the national healthcare plan, like many other countries in the world? Senior citizens, I'm on that path. I'm officially a senior citizen. I asked my physician the other day, would you take Medicare? I have my all insurance, and she said it's useless. So I think taking care of our people who pay taxes all their life and all that, it's sad for them to worry about their medication versus food. I've seen on 60 Minutes, I think many years ago, where people had to go to Mexico to buy the same medicine for 1/10 of the price. So that is going out of control. That's one. Last year, over 1 million young Americans chose not to go pursue their education. To your point, the alignment of the production of prepared workers to meet the needs of the industries is an important piece. And I don't know what went wrong with regards to that. Supporting our educational institutions of all types, I think is key for us to continue to provide ready to work workers.
I'll answer those in reverse order. I'm very proud of that I've always been a product of public education. I went to public school in Hazelton, Hazel Elementary, D.A. Harmon Junior High, Hazelton and Hazelton Area High School. I went to Penn State for my undergrad and UCLA for my postgraduate work. My opponent, he went to all private schools growing up, including in Canada. It's very different lifestyle. I'll tell you what, our public schools in Pennsylvania are the gateway to a comfortable upper middle class lifestyle. My father was the first guy in his family of 9 kids to get a college education. He's a civil engineer from Penn State. My brother and sister went to Penn State. Penn State University is a treasure, in my opinion. A lot of civic and state pride in our university. I think that we need to make sure all of our universities are fantastic, especially our public universities. And I don't mean to take shots at private universities, but I will. A lot of these private universities have big endowments, $40 billion, $30 billion endowments. And they just seem more into growing their endowments than in helping folks, middle-class means, go to those universities. We need to open up all of our universities to a more diverse, underserved group of people to get them in and get them better educations. But I really feel like our education system, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things to be done better. Coming from a family where my mother was a teacher, a lot of my cousins are teachers, there's profound challenges in education. One thing we didn't get to touch on is how COVID has affected our children. Children that went through COVID are behind where we were when we were children. We need some really remedial efforts to try to help these children catch up so they're ready for our great universities, so they're ready for the jobs of the future. If you were, anywhere from, let's call it ages 4 through 12 when COVID hit, you're probably a year or two behind folks 5 or 10 years ago. So that's going to be a profound challenge. That's something that I haven't heard talked about a lot. How are we going to get these children the education they need? Maybe it's more funding for some summer school programs. Maybe it's remote learning over the internet, but these kids are really facing some hard things. Then to answer your question about medical, I do not support Canadian style nationalized healthcare. Perhaps the next guy who comes in who spent some time up there has a more kind view on that. I do think we need better healthcare. We need better healthcare for our senior citizens. We need more choices for people on Medicare. I'm a big proponent. Could you imagine in your business if you didn't tell your customers how much things cost? Would that go over in any of your businesses? Yet in the medical field, which is 17% of our economy, I have no idea what I pay when I go in the office. I hurt my hand a few weeks ago. I went to get an x-ray. How much is this x-ray going to cost? I don't know. Do I really need this x-ray? I don't know. Is there a cheaper version of this x-ray? I don't know. Your insurance is going to cover it. Your insurance is going to cover them. Then we wonder why we're paying $1 trillion for Medicare, why your bills as corporate folks are going out of control. We have no transparency in pricing. When you go into Chipotle, if your burrito costs $9 or your Tostito costs $10, but we don't know if you're going to go in and spend $5,000 on a procedure or $25,000 on a procedure. We need federal transparency laws when it comes to medical care. We need people to be able to make decisions based on pricing. We need a more informed consumer base, and we need more competition in medical care. How can you have competition if there's no price signals? It shocks me that we don't know what things cost in our medical care, and especially when you're dealing with parents in their 70s and 80s. Could you imagine somebody in their 80s trying to make medical decisions? when they have no idea of the cost of their care? Why has that been allowed to persevere? Mr. Cartwright's been in office for 10 years. Have you ever heard him talking about actually telling people how much their medicine costs? I think that is something where we can make huge strides if we just say, you have to tell people what it's going to cost to get the care you recommend as a medical provider.
So I think we might have time for one more question if we've got one. Sure.
Bring you back around a little bit to public education and how even today you talk about education, workforce development, immigration, almost all of three entirely independent topics. What can the federal government do to kind of bring those around so that it becomes one topic? If we have families sending kids to school, we have access to those families. Instead of 87,000 IRS agents, why can't we use them and somehow help these families now go through the process that is a challenging process to become people? Why can't we fund career counselors as opposed to guidance counselors who are essentially crisis counselors now as
Right.
opposed to true career counseling? Why can't we, instead of incentivizing schools to just put kids in secondary, get them into lifetime learning processes, concepts of how career pathways can help them? I think instead of looking at them independently, how can we start looking at these all tied together as one?
I like that holistic approach. And I have a cousin who is a guidance counselor, and I've had some really good discussions with her. Career counseling would be very helpful. I think that should be a priority in our school system. I think it's something we probably have to start with at the state level. It's very hard from the federal level to mandate that, but I really like that idea of career counselors. When it comes to immigration, we're one of the only countries in the world that does not have a merit-based system of legal immigration, where we try specifically to bring in people where we have needs in certain industries. We're one of the only ones that instead bases it on a family reunification approach in much of our immigration. So I think we can reform our legal immigration system to kind of prioritize. I think that's a really a great area. I guess I just kind of say in conclusion, we need to do much better in public education. And I think that starts with federal and state government working more closely together. And just, I want to end on, I think our country's in real trouble. I think our country's in a ditch. I think it'll stay in a ditch if we keep electing the people we've always elected. So if you guys think that the country's on a good track, I'm probably not the candidate for you. But if you think we need to change, if you think America deserves better than 8.5% inflation and $4 gasoline and a civic discourse that's ripping the country apart, I'd ask you to take an opportunity and consider voting for a change and consider voting for me. And I'm just really grateful for you having me here today.
Thanks for coming, Jim.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.